My name is Floyd, 28 years old, and I was about to have the wedding of my dreams, until my father bluntly declared, "We're not funding this circus," canceling everything we'd planned. My sister Victoria smirked, adding, "Better luck next time." All I could say was, "Got it," before walking away. The strange part? A few weeks later, my phone wouldn't stop ringing with their calls. Before I share what happened, let me know where you're watching from, and hit subscribe to hear more stories about breaking free from toxic relationships. I grew up in what most would consider a privileged household. My father, Thomas, built his business empire from scratch and never let anyone forget it. At 60 years old, he still maintained an intimidating presence. His salt and pepper hair always perfectly styled, his custom suits without a single wrinkle. My mother, Eleanor, 58, played the role of the dutiful wife, hosting dinner parties and charity galas while maintaining a pristine image. Then there was my younger sister, Victoria, 25, who had been the apple of my parents' eyes since the day she was born. Our Tudor-style mansion sat on 3 acres in one of the most exclusive neighborhoods in Connecticut. 6 bedrooms, 7 bathrooms, an indoor pool, and gardens maintained by a team of landscapers. From the outside, everything looked perfect. We had country club memberships, vacations to exotic locations twice a year, and cars that cost more than what most people made in 5 years. But wealth comes with expectations. From an early age, I understood my role: excel academically, maintain the right social connections, and eventually take over the family business. There was no room for deviation or individuality. My father had my entire life mapped out before I could even speak. The Williams name means something in this town, my father would often remind me. Everything we do reflects on our legacy. The pressure was constant, suffocating. While other kids played sports for fun, I competed because winning was expected. My college applications weren't about finding the right fit for me, but about which prestigious name would look best on the family Christmas newsletter. I still remember my high school graduation. While other parents hugged their children with pride, my father simply nodded and said, "Georgetown was the right choice. The connections you'll make there will serve the business well." Not a word about my achievements, or how hard I'd worked to maintain my perfect GPA. I did everything right. Graduated summa cum laude from Georgetown with a double major in business and finance. Took an entry-level position at my father's company despite higher-paying offers from competitors because family loyalty comes first. I worked 12-hour days, sacrificed weekends, and earned every promotion through merit rather than nepotism. But nothing was ever enough. "That presentation lacked confidence," he'd say, after I landed a $1 million client. "Johnson's son just made partner at his firm. He's 2 years younger than you," he'd remind me over Sunday dinners. The emotional distance between us grew wider with each passing year. My mother would occasionally try to mediate, but she'd ultimately side with my father. Victoria watched and learned, adopting his critical tone and dismissive attitude. Family gatherings became performances where I played the role of dutiful son while swallowing my growing resentment. I dated women from appropriate families, attended the right social events, and kept my true thoughts to myself. I was 30 years into my life before I realized I'd never truly lived it for myself. Then came the day I met Rachel. It was a Tuesday morning at a small coffee shop downtown. I'd stepped in to grab my usual black coffee before a client meeting when the barista called out, "Caramel macchiato for Rachel," but no one approached the counter. The barista called again, and still no response. I noticed a young woman in the corner, completely absorbed in a book, unaware of her surroundings. She had curly brown hair pulled into a messy bun, glasses that kept sliding down her nose, and a colorful scarf that stood out among the sea of business attire. "Excuse me," I said, approaching her table. "Are you Rachel? I think your coffee's ready." She looked up, startled, then glanced at her watch. "Oh." I completely lost track of time. "Thank you." Something about her genuine smile and complete lack of pretense caught me off guard. I was used to calculated social interactions, but Rachel seemed refreshingly authentic. We started talking. She was a kindergarten teacher who loved her job. She came from a middle-class family in a small town I'd never visited. She laughed easily, spoke passionately about her students, and didn't seem the least bit impressed when she learned my last name. That first conversation lasted an hour, making me late for my meeting. But for once, I didn't care about the schedule or expectations. I asked for her number before leaving, something I'd never done so spontaneously before. Dating Rachel opened my eyes to a different kind of life. She lived in a small apartment filled with books and plants. Her furniture was mismatched but comfortable. She cooked dinner instead of ordering in, taught me how to make pasta from scratch, and introduced me to friends who talked about passions and dreams instead of stock portfolios and real estate investments. For the first time in my life, I felt seen for who I really was, not what my name represented or what I could provide. Rachel didn't care about designer labels or exclusive restaurants. She was happiest during our hikes in local parks or quiet evenings watching old movies. After 8 months of dating, I asked her to move in with me. Not to my downtown penthouse that my father had helped me purchase, but to a new place we chose together. It was a modest 3-bedroom house with a small backyard where Rachel immediately started planning a garden. It wasn't in the prestigious neighborhood my family expected, but it felt more like home than anywhere I'd ever lived. I was happy, truly happy, and I foolishly believed my family would eventually see that and accept Rachel into our lives. I couldn't have been more wrong. Rachel and I grew closer with each passing day. We developed routines and traditions that became the foundation of our relationship. Sunday mornings meant pancakes and coffee on our porch. Wednesday evenings were dedicated to trying new recipes together. We had inside jokes, shared dreams, and plans for the future that excited rather than suffocated me. She taught me to appreciate simple pleasures. The perfect cup of tea on a rainy afternoon, the satisfaction of finishing a challenging book, the joy of planting seeds and watching them grow. I showed her my world too. Though she was less impressed by the expensive restaurants and exclusive clubs than the hidden art galleries and historic buildings I'd never properly appreciated before. You notice so much more when you're not just trying to impress people, she told me one evening as we walked hand in hand through the city park watching the sunset. I've lived here my whole life and never really saw how beautiful it could be. Rachel helped me rediscover parts of myself I'd buried under years of family expectations. I started drawing again. Something I'd loved as a child but abandoned when my father deemed it a waste of time. I reconnected with old friends who'd drifted away as I became more entrenched in my father's world. She encouraged me to set boundaries at work, to leave at reasonable hours, to take vacations where we actually disconnected. Under her influence, I began questioning whether I truly wanted to take over the family business, or if I'd been following that path simply because it had been laid out for me. After a year together, I couldn't imagine my life without her, but I could no longer avoid introducing her to my family. The dinner was scheduled for 7:30 on a Friday evening at my parents' house. Rachel spent hours choosing the right outfit, wanting to make a good impression without pretending to be someone she wasn't. She settled on a simple blue dress that brought out her eyes, minimal jewelry, and low heels. "They're going to love you," I assured her, though the knot in my stomach suggested otherwise. From the moment we arrived, the atmosphere was frigid. My mother greeted us with air kisses and a plastered smile that didn't reach her eyes. My father barely looked up from his phone, offering a cursory handshake to Rachel before returning to his emails. Victoria arrived late, deliberately I suspected, making a grand entrance in an outfit that cost more than Rachel's monthly salary. "So," my mother began once we were seated at the dining table, "Floyd tells us, you're a teacher?" "Yes, kindergarten," Rachel replied warmly. "I've been teaching for 5 years now." "How?" "Noble," my mother said, in a tone that suggested anything but. "I have a friend who serves on the board of Westfield Academy. They always need good teachers, and the salary is quite competitive." "That's kind of you." "But I love my public school," Rachel said. "The diversity of students, the challenges. It's where I feel I can make the biggest difference." My father finally looked up. "Difference? Teaching finger painting to 5-year-olds? I felt Rachel stiffen beside me. "Early education is the foundation of all learning, Mr. Williams. It's where children develop critical thinking skills, emotional intelligence, and—" Yes, he waved dismissively. "Very commendable." "Floyd, how's the Hutchinson account coming along? I heard there might be some complications." And just like that, Rachel was excluded from the conversation. For the next 30 minutes, my father dominated the discussion with business talk, my mother occasionally commenting on social events, and Victoria scrolling through her phone, barely concealing her boredom. When Rachel attempted to engage by asking questions about the family business, my father gave vague, condescending answers, as if she couldn't possibly understand the complexities involved. When she mentioned her family's small construction company, Victoria snickered. "Is something funny?" Rachel asked directly. No, Victoria said with feigned innocence. "It's just cute. Like comparing a corner lemonade stand to Starbucks." The rest of the evening continued in similar fashion. Every attempt Rachel made was met with subtle dismissals or outright condescension. By the time dessert was served, she had mostly fallen silent, and I was seething with anger I couldn't express. As we prepared to leave, my mother pulled me aside while Rachel was retrieving her coat. "She seems nice," she said, her tone making it clear this wasn't a compliment. "But Floyd, really? She's not exactly William's material, is she?" "She's the woman I love, Mother," I replied firmly. "Love," she sighed as if I'd said something childish. "You're 31, darling. It's time to think about appropriate partnerships, not just infatuations." The drive home was quiet. I apologized repeatedly while Rachel assured me it was fine, though we both knew it wasn't. When we arrived home, she finally let her guard down. "They hate me," she said simply, tears in her eyes. "They don't know you," I countered, pulling her close. "They're judging based on their own narrow view of the world. Will they ever accept me? Us?" I wanted to lie, to promise that time would change their minds. Instead, I made a different promise. "It doesn't matter if they do. You're who I choose, Rachel. Not their expectations, not their approval. You." 2 weeks later, I proposed. Not with an extravagant production my family would have expected, but during a quiet moment at home. Rachel was in our kitchen, flour on her cheek as she baked bread, laughing at something I'd said. The sunlight through the window caught her hair just right, and I knew with absolute certainty this was where my future belonged. I didn't have an expensive ring. I'd chosen to buy one without my family's connections, something modest but meaningful that wouldn't make Rachel uncomfortable wearing around her kindergartners. When I knelt down in our kitchen, surrounded by the life we'd built together, she started crying before I could even finish asking the question. "Yes," she whispered, 1,000 times yes. We began planning a small, meaningful wedding. Something outdoors, perhaps in the botanical gardens where we'd spent countless Sunday afternoons. Just close friends and family, good food, and dancing under the stars. Rachel's parents were overjoyed, immediately offering their support and love. I hoped, foolishly perhaps, that my family would come around once they realized how serious I was, that they would see my happiness and want to be part of it. I couldn't have been more wrong. When we announced our engagement, the responses were as varied as they were revealing. Rachel's colleagues threw a surprise party with handmade decorations and a cake baked by one of the parents from her class. My few close friends outside the family business were genuinely happy for us, offering congratulations without the underlying judgments I'd grown accustomed to. Rachel's parents, Robert and Linda, drove 4 hours to take us out to dinner. They weren't wealthy people, but they were generous with their affection and support. Robert shook my hand with genuine warmth, telling me how thrilled they were to welcome me to their family. Linda hugged Rachel and me, tears in her eyes, already talking about family traditions and holidays together. "We've been saving a little each month since Rachel graduated college," Robert told me quietly. "It's not much, but we want to help with the wedding. Whatever you two decide, we're behind you 100%. Their unconditional support made my family's silence all the more deafening. A week passed, then 2, without any acknowledgement of our engagement. No calls, no cards, not even a perfunctory text message. Then, just as we'd begun making peace with planning without them, my mother called. "We should discuss the wedding," she said without preamble. "Your father and I have been talking, and we feel it's important the Williams family maintains certain standards for such an occasion." Before I could process what was happening, my parents had taken over. Suddenly, our intimate garden ceremony for 60 people transformed into an elaborate event for 300 at the country club. The simple dinner and dancing we'd envisioned became a 5-course meal with a renowned chef my father's golf buddy had recommended. The wildflower arrangements Rachel had her heart set on were deemed too rustic and replaced with elaborate floral sculptures. "Dad, this isn't what we want," I tried explaining during one tense meeting in his study. "What you want is irrelevant," he replied without looking up from the guest list he was revising. "This wedding isn't just about you. It's about maintaining our family's social position. Half of these people are important business contacts. But it's our wedding, I insisted. Shouldn't it reflect who Rachel and I are as a couple? He finally looked up, his expression a mixture of pity and condescension. Floyd, I'm allowing this match despite my reservations. The least you can do is ensure the event itself doesn't embarrass the family. Allowing. As if my life, my happiness, my choice of partner were permissions he could grant or withhold. The guest list became a particular point of contention. Rachel's parents had a large extended family, cousins, aunts, uncles, childhood friends who were practically family. My father insisted we limit her side to immediate family and a handful of close friends to make room for his business associates and social connections, people I barely knew. We're paying for it, became his refrain whenever we objected. That gives us certain prerogatives. What had started as our dream slowly morphed into a nightmare. Rachel, who had initially tried to accommodate my parents' suggestions, became increasingly withdrawn from the planning process. I would find her staring at wedding magazines with a vacant expression or hanging up the phone with tears in her eyes after conversations with my mother. The tension extended beyond just the wedding details. My parents insisted on a prenuptial agreement, presenting it as non-negotiable despite Rachel never once expressing interest in my family's money. They questioned her about future career plans, making it clear they expected her to leave teaching once we had children, something we hadn't even discussed yet. Victoria was perhaps the worst of all. She'd appointed herself as an unofficial wedding consultant, showing up uninvited to appointments and undermining Rachel's choices at every turn. "That dress makes you look boxy," she told Rachel during one bridal appointment. "And honestly, with your coloring, white is really not flattering. The band you've chosen is so basic," she commented another time. "Everyone will expect something more sophisticated." The subtle digs became so constant that Rachel began avoiding any wedding discussions when Victoria was present, which my sister took as further evidence that Rachel couldn't handle our family's lifestyle. Meanwhile, tensions were brewing between our families as well. During what should have been a pleasant dinner to introduce our parents, my father spent the evening subtly highlighting the economic disparities between our families. He ordered the most expensive wine on the menu, discussed recent renovations to their vacation home, and asked Robert patronizing questions about his little construction business. I watched Rachel's father grow quieter throughout the evening, his initial friendliness fading into dignified restraint. Linda maintained her warm demeanor, but I noticed how her hand trembled slightly when she reached for her water glass after one particularly condescending comment from my mother. After the dinner, Rachel was uncharacteristically silent on the drive home. "I'm sorry about my parents," I said. "It's not your fault," she replied, staring out the window. "But Floyd, is this what our life will be like? Constant judgment? Always feeling like we don't measure up?" Her question hung in the air between us. I had no answer that wouldn't sound like an empty promise. As the wedding date approached, what should have been a joyous time became increasingly stressful. Rachel and I were fighting more often, small disagreements escalating quickly due to the constant pressure. Several times, I caught her looking at her engagement ring with an expression that made my stomach drop. "Maybe we should postpone," she suggested one night, after a particularly brutal meeting with the wedding planner my mother had hired. "Give everyone some time to adjust to the idea of us." "Is that what you want?" I asked, terrified of her answer. She looked at me for a long moment. "I want you, Floyd. I've always just wanted you, but I'm starting to think I can't have you without all of this." She gestured vaguely, encompassing the invisible weight of my family's expectations and interference. That night, I lay awake long after Rachel had fallen into restless sleep. I had spent my entire life trying to meet my father's expectations, bending myself into shapes that never quite fit, sacrificing my own happiness for family approval that never came. Was I willing to let him dictate this too? Was I willing to lose Rachel to keep the peace? The answer came with surprising clarity. No, not this time. Not with her. The next morning, I called Rachel's parents and asked if we could meet privately, without telling anyone else. Something had to change, and I was finally ready to take a stand. The catalyst came during what should have been a special moment. Rachel's final dress fitting. The original dress she'd fallen in love with, a simple, elegant A-line with subtle lace details, had been vetoed by my mother and sister as too plain for a Williams wedding. Instead, they'd pushed for a designer gown with an elaborate train and beadwork so heavy Rachel could barely move in it. I wasn't supposed to be at this appointment tradition and all that, but Rachel had texted me, asking if I could stop by toward the end. Her message seemed urgent, so I rearranged my afternoon meetings and arrived at the boutique just as things were falling apart. From outside the private fitting room, I could hear my mother's voice, its pitch rising in that way. It did when she was exercising what she called quality control, but what everyone else recognized as criticism. "The alterations haven't addressed the issue with your shoulders at all," she was saying. "And I still think we need more structure in the bodice area." "I think it looks beautiful," came Linda's gentle defense of her daughter. "Well," my mother replied with a thin laugh, "I suppose beauty is subjective, but this is a society wedding, not a backyard barbecue." When I entered, the scene was worse than I'd imagined. Rachel stood on a pedestal surrounded by mirrors, looking small and defeated in a dress that overwhelmed her frame. My mother and Victoria circled like fashion critics, pointing out perceived flaws, while the boutique staff hovered anxiously. Rachel's mother sat in the corner, her hands clasped tightly together, distress evident on her kind face. But it was Rachel's expression that stopped me cold. I'd never seen her look so empty, so diminished. This vibrant, confident woman who captivated kindergartners with her storytelling and stood up to school board officials when necessary had been reduced to a silent mannequin for my family's vision. "What's going on here?" I asked, though it was painfully obvious. Victoria rolled her eyes. "Dress fitting. Big brother. You're not supposed to see this." "Rachel texted me," I said, moving toward my fiancé. "Are you okay?" Before she could answer, my mother interjected. "We're just making some final adjustments. The neckline isn't quite right, and the train needs—" "Mom," I interrupted. "Could I talk to Rachel alone for a minute?" My mother looked affronted. "We have a schedule to maintain. The boutique has another appointment after us, and we still need to—" "Eleanor," Linda suddenly spoke up, rising from her chair. "I think a short break would do everyone good. Perhaps we could get some coffee across the street?" The surprise of Rachel's mild-mannered mother standing up to mine momentarily stunned everyone into agreement. As they filed out Victoria shooting daggers with her eyes, my mother murmuring about timelines, and Linda giving us an encouraging smile, I turned to Rachel. The moment the door closed, she crumpled, sinking down onto the fitting room couch in a billow of expensive fabric. "I can't do this anymore, Floyd," she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. "This isn't me. None of this is us." I knelt before her, taking her hands. "The dress?" "Everything," she said, meeting my eyes. "The dress, the venue, the guest list full of strangers, the constant criticism. Your parents hate me. Your sister actively wants this to fail. Every decision we make gets overruled. I feel like I'm disappearing a little more each day." Her words cut through me. I had been so focused on managing individual conflicts that I'd missed the bigger picture. The woman I loved was being systematically erased. "We'll fix this," I promised. "Today. Now." I helped her change back into her clothes, called a car service, and took her home, leaving my mother and sister to return to an empty fitting room. On the way, I called my father's office and requested an urgent family meeting that evening. His assistant, recognizing the determination in my voice, managed to clear his schedule. At 7 that evening, we gathered in my parents' formal living room. My father sat in his usual armchair, looking irritated at the interruption to his routine. My mother perched on the adjacent sofa, while Victoria lounged on the window seat, scrolling through her phone with performative boredom. Rachel sat beside me on the love seat, our hands intertwined. She had wanted to face this together, despite my offer to handle it alone. "This better be important," my father began. "I had to reschedule a call with our Japanese investors." "It is," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "Rachel and I want to discuss the wedding." "What about it? The deposits are paid, the invitations are out." "If this is about the menu again—" "We want to return to our original plan," I interrupted. "A smaller ceremony, the people who actually matter to us, a celebration that reflects who we are." My father's expression darkened. "Absolutely not. We've invested considerable resources into creating an event appropriate for this family." "That's just it, Dad. It's become an event for this family, not a wedding for us." "Don't be dramatic, Floyd," my mother sighed. "Every bride gets wedding jitters. Rachel will appreciate having done things properly once it's all over." "Rachel is sitting right here," I pointed out, "and has barely been consulted on any decisions in the past 3 months." Perhaps because her ideas were so limited, Victoria chimed in, finally looking up from her phone. Not everyone has the background to understand what's appropriate for a family of our standing. Rachel tensed beside me, but remained silent, a fact that seemed to embolden my sister. I mean, really, Victoria continued. Garden wildflowers and food trucks? It would have been a laughingstock. We saved you from embarrassing yourselves. Enough, I said sharply. This isn't helping. No, let her continue, Rachel suddenly spoke, her voice quiet but firm. I'd like to understand exactly what makes me so unsuitable in your family's eyes. A heavy silence fell over the room. My father leaned forward, steepling his fingers in the way he did before delivering a particularly cutting business assessment. Since you asked directly, I'll be candid, he said. Marriage, in families like ours, isn't merely a romantic arrangement. It's a social and financial alliance. Floyd's position, both currently and his future role in the company, requires a certain type of partner. Someone who understands the business world, who can host clients, who moves in the right circles. And you think I can't learn these things? Rachel asked. I think, my father said with cold precision, that it would be like teaching a cat to swim. Possible, perhaps, with enough effort, but ultimately against its nature. The casual cruelty of his analogy hung in the air. My mother looked down at her hands, not contradicting him but not supporting him either. Victoria smirked. I see, Rachel said softly. Then, to my surprise, she stood up. Thank you for your honesty, Mr. Williams. I appreciate knowing exactly where I stand. Rachel, I began, but she squeezed my hand, silently asking me to let her continue. I love your son, she told my parents. Not his name, not his bank account, not his social position. Just him, the man who brings me coffee in bed on Sunday mornings. The man who listens to my students' stories like they're the most important things in the world. The man who has spent his entire life trying to earn your approval. My father's expression remained impassive, but a muscle twitched in his jaw, the only sign her words had landed. Our wedding should celebrate that love, she continued. If you can't see the value in that, then perhaps you shouldn't be part of it. The room went completely still. No one ever spoke to my father this way, certainly not in his own home. He rose slowly, his 6'2" frame towering over Rachel's 5'5". Is that an ultimatum, young lady? It's a boundary, she replied, not backing down. My father turned to me. And you? Do you support this? Rebellion? I stood, placing my arm around Rachel's shoulders. I do. This wedding has become something neither of us wants. We're going back to our original plan. His face flushed with anger. Then you can pay for it yourselves. I'm not funding this circus. Fine, I said, feeling strangely liberated by his threat. We'll manage. On a kindergarten teacher's salary and what you make at the company? Victoria laughed. Good luck with that. Better luck next time, she added with a dismissive wave, turning back to her phone. I looked at my family, my father rigid with anger, my mother silent with disapproval, my sister contemptuous, and felt something final shift inside me. Got it, I said simply. Taking Rachel's hand, we walked out of the house I grew up in, neither of us looking back as the heavy door closed behind us. The first night after our confrontation with my family, Rachel and I sat in stunned silence on our living room floor, takeout containers untouched between us. The magnitude of what had happened, what we had done, was still sinking in. Are you okay? Rachel finally asked, her voice small in the quiet apartment. I don't know, I answered honestly. I've never stood up to my father like that before. Are you having regrets? I considered her question carefully. The weight of 31 years of conditioning, of striving for approval, of following the path laid out for me, pressed heavily on my chest. But alongside it was something else, something lighter, clearer. No, I realized. No regrets about standing up for us. I'm just processing what it means. Rachel moved closer, resting her head on my shoulder. What does it mean, Floyd? I don't know yet, but we'll figure it out together. That night began the most challenging and ultimately transformative period of my life. The immediate practical concerns were overwhelming. Without my parents' financial support, our wedding plans needed complete restructuring. More significantly, I had to consider my professional future. Continuing to work at my father's company seemed untenable given the personal rift. The financial reality hit hard the next morning. We sat at our kitchen table with spreadsheets and calculators, assessing our situation. Rachel's teaching salary was modest but stable. My position at Williams Industries paid well, but I knew it wouldn't last. We had some savings, but nothing close to what we'd need to maintain our current lifestyle long-term, while also funding a wedding. Maybe we should just elope, Rachel suggested, only half joking. Justice of the peace, 2 witnesses, done. Is that what you want? I asked seriously. She thought for a moment, then shook her head. No, I want to celebrate with the people who love us. I want my parents to walk me down the aisle. I want our friends to dance badly after too much champagne. I want real memories, not a compromise. Then that's what we'll have, I promised. We just need to get creative. That evening, as if sensing our distress, my best friend Greg called. We'd been friends since college, though we drifted somewhat as I became more consumed with my family's expectations. He'd met Rachel several times and had immediately approved, telling me privately that she brought out a version of me he hadn't seen in years. Heard you finally stood up to the Williams dynasty, he said without preamble when I answered. About damn time. News travels fast, I replied, surprised. Victoria's been on a social media rampage. Something about how you're throwing away your future on an inappropriate match. Her words, not mine. I groaned. Of course she has. So what's the plan now? Honestly, I have no idea. Greg was silent for a moment. Have dinner with us tomorrow. Jessica and I want to talk to you both. The next evening, we met Greg and his wife Jessica at their home. Unlike the formal dinner parties my family hosted, this was a casual affair, homemade pasta, good wine, and genuine conversation. As we finished dessert, Greg cleared his throat. Jess and I have been talking, he began. We want to help with the wedding. That's kind, I started. But we can't accept. It's not charity, Jessica interrupted. It's friendship. We have that lakeside property upstate that's just sitting empty. It's got that beautiful clearing with the view of the mountains. Perfect for a ceremony. And I know a guy who owns a catering company, Greg added. He owes me a favor from law school days. Nothing fancy, but good food, reasonably priced. I looked at Rachel, saw the hope flickering in her eyes. Why would you do this for us? I asked. Greg leaned forward. Because for 10 years I've watched you try to fit yourself into a box that was never the right shape. And since you met Rachel, I've seen glimpses of the Floyd I knew in college, the one with his own ideas and ambitions. That guy deserves a shot at happiness without strings attached. That night marked the beginning of a community effort that still humbles me when I think about it. Rachel's colleagues offered to handle decorations. A parent from her class was an amateur photographer who volunteered their services. One of my few work friends outside the family inner circle connected us with a small local band. Most surprisingly, Rachel's parents arrived the following weekend with a check. It's not much, Robert said, slightly embarrassed. Just what we've been saving. About $15,000. The amount would have been a rounding error in my parents' wedding budget, but the generosity behind it brought me to tears. These people, who had welcomed me unconditionally, were giving us their life savings. We can't take this, I protested. You absolutely can, Linda insisted. We've been saving for Rachel's wedding since she was born. This is what it's for. As one door closed, others opened. A former client I'd helped years earlier offered me a position at his startup, lower salary but equity in the company, and the chance to build something from the ground up. Rachel and I downsized our living arrangements, moving to a smaller apartment to cut expenses. We sold things we didn't need, simplified our lives, and discovered that less really could be more. Each step away from my family's orbit was terrifying but exhilarating. For the first time, I was making choices based solely on what would bring us happiness, not what would meet external expectations. The most difficult decision was giving notice at Williams Industries. I requested a meeting with my father, determined to resign professionally and respectfully, despite our personal conflict. His assistant scheduled me for 15 minutes at the end of a Tuesday, a clear message about my diminished importance. When I entered his office, he didn't look up from his computer. I'm resigning, I said without preamble, placing my formal letter on his desk. That got his attention. His head snapped up, eyes narrowing. Don't be ridiculous. This tantrum has gone on long enough. It's not a tantrum, Dad. It's a life choice. I've accepted a position elsewhere. Where? He demanded. When I told him, he laughed harshly. A startup? With no pedigree, no established client base? You're throwing away a guaranteed executive position for, what? To prove some point? To be happy, I said simply. Happiness is a luxury, Floyd. Security, legacy, responsibility, those are what matter. I studied my father's face, the deep lines around his mouth, the perpetual furrow between his brows, the thinly veiled dissatisfaction that seemed permanently etched into his features. Was this what security looked like? Was this the legacy I wanted? I disagree, I told him quietly. And that's okay. We can want different things. I placed my company keycard on his desk beside the resignation letter. My team is fully briefed on all ongoing projects. I've documented everything and trained Justin to take over my accounts. There shouldn't be any disruption. Something flickered across my father's face, surprise perhaps at the thoroughness of my exit strategy. 2 weeks' notice is standard, he said stiffly. The letter specifies 4 weeks. I wanted to ensure a smooth transition. He nodded once, the closest thing to approval I was likely to get. As I turned to leave, he spoke again. Your mother's upset. Victoria too. It was as close to an emotional appeal as my father was capable of making. I'm sorry to hear that, I replied. They have my number if they'd like to talk. And if I forbid you to leave the company? I paused at the door. I'm 31 years old, Dad. You can't forbid me to do anything anymore. As I walked out of Williams Industries for what I believed would be the last time, I felt lighter than I had in years. That evening, Rachel and I celebrated my resignation with cheap champagne and takeout, toasting to an uncertain but authentic future. Are you scared? She asked as we sat on our balcony, watching the sunset. Terrified, I admitted, but also free. The weeks that followed were a blur of activity. Planning our scaled-down wedding became a joy rather than a source of stress. Each decision reflected us as a couple, not a social obligation or business opportunity. We chose wildflowers and fairy lights, wrote our own vows, selected music that meant something to us rather than what would impress guests. And we did it all without a single input from my family, who maintained radio silence as our wedding date approached. Though I'd never admit it to Rachel, a small part of me kept hoping for some gesture of reconciliation, a call, a note, anything to suggest they might eventually accept my choices. But as the days passed with no contact, I forced myself to accept the reality. They had chosen their pride over my happiness. The night before our wedding, Rachel found me sitting alone on the porch of the cabin we'd rented near Greg's lakeside property. Second thoughts? She asked softly, settling beside me. Not about you, I assured her. Never about you. Just processing what's missing. She nodded, understanding without words. They could still show up tomorrow. I smiled sadly, appreciating her optimism but knowing better. They won't. Then it's their loss, she said firmly. Because tomorrow is going to be beautiful, and they'll miss seeing how happy their son is. She was right, of course. My family had made their choice. Now it was time to fully embrace mine. Our wedding day dawned with the kind of perfect weather that wedding planners dream about: clear blue skies, gentle breeze, temperatures in the low 70s. Greg's lakeside property looked transformed. String lights hung from trees surrounding a clearing that faced the water. Rows of white chairs formed an aisle leading to a simple arch decorated with wildflowers and greenery. Instead of an elaborate designer wedding, we had created something intimate and authentically us. In the small boathouse that served as the bridal suite, I knew Rachel was getting ready with her mother, her 2 best friends from college, and 3 colleagues from her school. I was in the main house with Greg, his brother Matt, and Rachel's father Robert, who had taken to treating me with the paternal warmth I'd never experienced from my own father. Nervous? Robert asked, helping me with my tie. A little, I admitted, but not about marrying Rachel. He nodded, understanding the complexity behind my answer. Family is complicated, son, but today you're starting your own. That's where your focus should be. As I stood under the flower arch waiting for Rachel, I surveyed our guests, about 50 people who truly cared about us. Teachers from Rachel's school, a few trusted colleagues from my old job and my new startup, friends who had stood by us. Not a single person was there out of obligation or business connections. The small string trio began playing, and everyone stood. And then I saw her, walking arm in arm with her parents down the aisle. Rachel had found her original dress, the one she'd fallen in love with before my mother and sister intervened. She'd added her grandmother's vintage lace veil, and carried a bouquet of wildflowers that matched the arch above us. She looked radiant, authentic, entirely herself, and more beautiful than I could have imagined. As her parents placed her hand in mine, I felt a profound sense of rightness. This was exactly how it should be. Our vows were personal and honest. We promised to support each other's dreams, to communicate even when it was difficult, to build a life based on mutual respect and joy. When the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, the cheer that went up from our small gathering felt more genuine than any polite applause at a society wedding could have been. The reception was held in the same clearing, now transformed with long tables, more string lights, and simple centerpieces. The catering, while not the Michelin-starred affair my father had arranged, was delicious farm-to-table fare that everyone raved about. Instead of a 5-tier wedding cake that would have gone mostly uneaten, we had a small cake for cutting and an assortment of pies from a local bakery. People danced barefoot on the grass as the sun set over the lake. Rachel's father gave a touching toast that left few dry eyes. Greg shared embarrassing stories from our college days that had everyone laughing. There were no formal place cards, no rigid schedule, just genuine celebration. Late in the evening, as I stood at the edge of the party watching Rachel dance with her students' parents, Greg approached with a beer in hand. "Any regrets?" he asked, following my gaze. "Not a single one," I replied truthfully. "This is exactly what a wedding should be. You know Victoria posted photos from St. Tropez today," he mentioned carefully. "Tagged your parents." I nodded, unsurprised. A pointed absence. "Does it bother you?" I considered his question honestly. "It does," I admitted. "But not enough to wish for anything different. Look around, Greg. This is real. The people here love us for who we are, not what we represent." "To authenticity," he said, raising his bottle. "To authenticity," I echoed, clinking my glass against his. Later that night, as Rachel and I swayed together during the last dance, she whispered, "Happy?" I pulled back to look at her face, illuminated by string lights and stars. "Completely," I told her. "You?" More than I knew was possible. We left for a modest honeymoon the next day, a cabin in the mountains rather than the European tour my parents would have expected. For 2 weeks, we hiked, read books by the fireplace, cooked meals together, and began our married life away from external pressures. When we returned to reality, it was to a new apartment we'd found before the wedding, smaller than our previous place but within our new budget. I started my job at the startup, throwing myself into building something from the ground up rather than maintaining what had been handed to me. Rachel began the new school year with her kindergartners, coming home with stories that made me laugh and marvel at her patience. We were happy, truly, deeply happy, in our new, simpler life. It was about a month after our wedding when the first social media post appeared. One of Victoria's friends had tagged her in a photo with a passive-aggressive caption, "Some families prioritize loyalty over passion. Respect." Soon after, Victoria herself began posting thinly veiled comments about family obligations and proper marriages. When these gained traction in her social circle, she grew bolder, eventually sharing a lengthy post about how certain people had broken our parents' hearts by choosing inappropriate partnerships over family traditions. I might never have known about any of this had Rachel's colleague not mentioned it during a dinner at our apartment. "It's so weird seeing your sister trash-talk you online when you seem so happy," she commented, apparently assuming I was aware. Rachel shot her a warning look, but it was too late. "What are you talking about?" I asked. There was an awkward pause before she pulled out her phone and showed me Victoria's Instagram feed. Reading my sister's distorted version of events, where she portrayed me as ungrateful and Rachel as a gold digger who had failed to secure the bag, made my stomach turn. "It doesn't matter," Rachel said firmly, taking the phone and handing it back. "We know the truth." She was right, of course, but the public nature of Victoria's attacks bothered me more than I wanted to admit. It wasn't just about us anymore. She was potentially damaging Rachel's reputation among parents at her school, people in our community. I decided to address it directly, sending Victoria a brief, private message asking her to stop posting about us. Her response was immediate and scathing. "The truth hurts, doesn't it? Mom cries every time someone mentions your name. Dad had to explain to the Richardsons why you weren't at their gala. You destroyed this family for a school teacher. Own it." I didn't respond. There was no point engaging with someone so determined to twist reality. Instead, I blocked her on all platforms and suggested Rachel do the same. It felt like drawing yet another boundary, another step away from the toxic dynamics I'd grown up with. Weeks passed without contact. I threw myself into my new job, finding unexpected fulfillment in building something from scratch. The startup culture was so different from Williams Industries' collaborative rather than competitive, innovative rather than traditional. For the first time in my professional life, my ideas were valued for their merit, not because of my last name. Rachel thrived in her classroom, eventually being nominated for a district teaching award. We made new friends, established new traditions, and gradually the ache of my family's absence dulled to an occasional pang rather than a constant presence. Then, 6 months after our wedding, my phone rang with my mother's number. I stared at the screen, heart pounding, unsure whether to answer. Rachel, noticing my expression, asked what was wrong. "It's my mom," I said, showing her the phone. "Are you going to answer?" I hesitated, then pressed accept. "Hello?" "Floyd." My mother's voice sounded smaller than I remembered. We were wondering if you might be available for coffee sometime this week." The request was so unexpected, so normal after months of silence, that I didn't immediately respond. "Floyd, are you there?" "Yes," I managed. "Coffee? Your father and I would like to see you. And Rachel, of course," she added, though the slight pause before my wife's name spoke volumes. "Why now?" I asked directly. My mother sighed. "It's been 6 months, Floyd. Isn't that long enough for everyone to have cooled down?" Her framing, as if our estrangement had been a simple spat rather than a fundamental rejection, was so typical that I almost laughed. "I'll need to discuss it with Rachel," I said. "I'll text you." After hanging up, I related the conversation to Rachel, who listened thoughtfully. "What do you want to do?" she asked when I finished. "Part of me wants to ignore them like they ignored us," I admitted. "But another part, I don't know. They're still my family." Rachel took my hand. "Then maybe we should hear what they have to say." 2 days later, we met my parents at a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown, public enough to discourage any scenes. My father looked older than I remembered, the lines around his eyes deeper. My mother had lost weight. They were both impeccably dressed as always, standing out among the casual Sunday crowd. The greeting was awkward handshakes rather than hugs, stilted pleasantries about the weather and the cafe's popularity. We ordered and sat at a corner table, an uncomfortable silence falling over us. "You look well," my mother finally offered. "Both of you." "We are well," I confirmed. "Very happy, actually." My father cleared his throat. "Victoria mentioned you've taken a position at some tech startup." "Yes, Innovate Solutions. We're developing software for educational institutions." He nodded, his expression unreadable. "And it's fulfilling?" The genuine question in his tone surprised me. "Very. I'm building something meaningful." Another silence fell, broken only when our drinks arrived. "Why did you want to see us?" Rachel finally asked, direct as always. My parents exchanged glances. My mother adjusted her scarf, a nervous gesture I recognized from childhood. "We've missed you," she said simply. "The house feels empty." It wasn't an apology, not even close, but from my mother, it was as near to an olive branch as I could expect. "I've missed aspects of our relationship too," I said carefully, "but I haven't missed the conditions that came with it." My father stiffened, but to my surprise, he didn't immediately defend himself. Instead, he studied me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. "Victoria is engaged," my mother announced, changing the subject. "To Bradley Huntington. You remember the Huntingtons, of course." "That's fast," I commented, recalling the banking heir Victoria had been casually dating before our wedding. "When it's right, my father said pointedly. And there it was, the implication that Victoria had made the correct choice while I had not. "I'm happy for her if she's happy," I said neutrally. "She'd like you to attend the engagement party next month," my mother continued. "Both of you," she added, with a nod toward Rachel. I glanced at my wife, who maintained a polite expression despite the absurdity of the invitation after Victoria's social media campaign against us. "I'm not sure that would be comfortable for anyone involved," I said. "She's your sister," my father stated, as if that single fact overrode all that had happened. "Yes, and she spent 6 months publicly criticizing my wife and me online," I countered. "Has she mentioned that?" My parents exchanged another look. "Victoria can be passionate," my mother allowed. "She can be cruel," I corrected, and I won't expose Rachel to that again." My father's expression darkened. "So you're refusing to attend your sister's engagement?" "I'm setting a boundary," I said, deliberately echoing Rachel's words from our confrontation months ago. "If Victoria apologizes sincerely for her behavior, we'd be happy to reconsider." My father looked like he wanted to argue, but my mother placed a restraining hand on his arm. "We understand," she said, though her tight smile suggested otherwise. "Perhaps we could meet again, just the four of us, before making any decisions about the engagement party." It wasn't much, but it was something, a small acknowledgement that reconciliation would take time and effort from both sides. "I'd like that," I said, realizing as I spoke that it was true. Despite everything, these complicated, flawed people were still my family. I didn't need their approval anymore, but I wasn't ready to write them off completely either. As we prepared to leave, my mother surprised me by approaching Rachel directly. "Your students are fortunate," she said stiffly. "Floyd mentioned you've been nominated for an award." Rachel blinked, clearly surprised by the acknowledgement. "Thank you. Yes, for innovative curriculum development." My mother nodded. "I was a teacher before I married Floyd's father. Did you know that?" I stared at her, stunned. She had never mentioned this in my entire life. "No," Rachel replied. "I didn't. 3rd grade, for 4 years. My mother adjusted her purse, seemingly embarrassed by the revelation. It was a long time ago. With that cryptic parting statement, my parents left the cafe, promising to be in touch about another meeting. "Well," Rachel said as we watched them walk to their car, "that was bizarre," I finished. "Did you know my mom was a teacher?" Rachel shook her head. "There's a lot we probably don't know about your parents." That evening, as we discussed the meeting, I realized something important. I no longer needed my parents' approval to feel complete. Their validation, or lack thereof, didn't define me anymore. I had built a life based on my own values, with a partner who loved me for exactly who I was. The road to healing our family relationships would be long, with no guarantee of success. My father might never fully accept my choices. Victoria might remain antagonistic. But for the first time, I felt equipped to engage with them on my own terms, without sacrificing my authenticity or happiness. "Do you think they'll ever truly accept us?" Rachel asked as we lay in bed that night. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "But I do know it doesn't matter as much as it once did. We're happy. We're building a good life. That's enough." She snuggled closer. "More than enough." In the darkness, I reflected on how far I'd come from the man who had spent his entire life seeking validation from people incapable of giving it freely. The journey hadn't been easy, but the destination, this quiet moment of contentment with the woman I loved, was worth every painful step. Over the following year, our relationship with my family evolved in ways I never could have predicted. The process was neither quick nor easy, but it was necessary, like setting a broken bone properly, so it can heal stronger than before. My mother was the first to make genuine efforts toward reconciliation. After our coffee shop meeting, she began reaching out regularly, tentative texts about neutral topics, eventually building to requests for lunch with just Rachel. These one-on-one meetings were awkward at first, but gradually something resembling mutual respect developed between the two most important women in my life. During one such lunch, Rachel later told me, my mother had finally shared her story. How she'd loved teaching but gave it up without question when she married my father, because that was what was expected of women in their social circle. How she'd channeled all her organizational skills and creativity into being the perfect corporate wife and mother. How, watching Rachel maintain her career despite marriage, had stirred both resentment and a wistful admiration she wasn't ready to acknowledge. "I think she's been mourning the life she never got to live," Rachel reflected. "It doesn't excuse how she treated us, but it helps explain it." Victoria proved more complicated. Her engagement to Bradley Huntington imploded spectacularly 3 months after the announcement, when he was photographed with the daughter of another prominent family. The public humiliation forced her to experience, in some small way, the pain of having personal matters exposed for public consumption. To my surprise, it was Rachel who reached out to her afterward, sending a simple message: "I'm sorry you're going through this. If you need someone to talk to who understands having private moments turned public, I'm here." Victoria didn't respond immediately, but a month later, she appeared at our door unannounced, looking uncharacteristically disheveled. "I don't know why I'm here," she said when I opened the door. "Come in anyway," I offered. That afternoon marked the beginning of a tentative truce. Victoria wasn't ready to apologize directly, but her willingness to sit in our modest apartment, drink our non-designer coffee, and speak to us as people rather than adversaries felt like progress. Over time, she began to see Rachel beyond the stereotype she'd constructed. She observed the passion Rachel brought to teaching, the genuine care she showed for others, the quiet confidence that had nothing to do with social status or material possessions. Gradually, Victoria's social media posts changed tone less about status and appearances, more about authenticity and personal growth. My father remained the most resistant to change. Our interactions were formal, limited mostly to brief conversations at family gatherings that my mother orchestrated. He never explicitly apologized for his behavior around our wedding, but I noticed subtle shifts in how he engaged with Rachel, asking about her work with actual interest, remembering details about her family, making small efforts that spoke louder than words. The most significant moment came unexpectedly during a dinner celebrating my mother's birthday. As everyone chatted over dessert, my father cleared his throat and addressed the table. "I'd like to acknowledge some news," he announced formally. "Floyd's company has secured Series A funding, $10 million. He raised his glass. "Congratulations, son. You've proven your concept has merit." The moment was typical of my father unable to simply express pride, couching his approval in terms of external validation and financial success. But the fact that he'd been following my career closely enough to know about the funding round before I'd mentioned it revealed more than his words. Later that evening, as we prepared to leave, he pulled me aside. "The educational software platform," he said awkwardly. "It's a good idea. Scalable. Fills a market need." "Thank you," I replied, recognizing this as the closest thing to "I'm proud of you" I was likely to receive. He nodded, looked like he might say something more, then simply squeezed my shoulder briefly before walking away. These small moments of connection, imperfect, halting, sometimes frustrating, gradually rebuilt bridges I had thought permanently burned. Not to what they had been before, but to something new. Relationships based on who we actually were rather than who my parents thought we should be. Throughout this process of family healing, Rachel and I continued building our own life together. My work at the startup became increasingly fulfilling as our educational platform gained traction. Rachel was promoted to lead teacher at her school, developing a curriculum that received district-wide recognition. We bought a small house with a garden where Rachel could grow vegetables and I could build the workshop I'd always wanted. We discussed starting a family, agreeing to wait another year or two until the company was more established. We traveled modestly but meaningfully, prioritizing experiences over luxury. Most importantly, we created a home built on mutual respect, open communication, and unconditional support, everything my childhood home had lacked. One evening, as we sat on our back porch, watching fireflies appear in the garden dusk, Rachel asked a question that made me reflect on our entire journey. "Do you ever regret it? Standing up to your family, walking away from everything?" I considered her question carefully. "No," I said finally. "I regret that it had to happen that way. I regret the pain it caused everyone. But standing up for us, for what I truly wanted? Never." She leaned against me, warm and solid. "Even with the financial changes, the career shift, the family drama?" "Especially with all that," I told her. "Those challenges showed me who I really am, what I'm capable of. Before, I was living someone else's vision of success. Now, I'm living my own." Looking back now, I realized that my father's rejection of our wedding was actually the most valuable gift he ever gave me. It forced me to decide what truly mattered: external validation or internal peace. The comfort of the familiar or the courage to create something authentic, the path of least resistance or the journey of most meaning. By trying to control my life, my family inadvertently set me free. By rejecting what didn't align with their values, they pushed me to define my own. By withdrawing their support, they gave me the opportunity to discover my own strength. The journey wasn't easy. There were nights I lay awake questioning my decisions, days I missed the security of my former life, moments I feared I'd made an irrevocable mistake. But with each challenge overcome, each small success achieved through our own efforts, my confidence in our path grew stronger. I learned that happiness isn't found in meeting others' expectations, but in having the courage to live according to your own values. I discovered that true wealth isn't measured in bank accounts or social connections, but in relationships built on genuine love and respect. I realized that standing up for yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary for building a life of integrity. Most profoundly, I understood that sometimes rejection is redirection. What feels like an ending can actually be the beginning of something far more valuable than what you're losing. Today, as I look at the life Rachel and I have built together, I feel a deep gratitude for the difficult journey that brought us here. Our relationship with my family continues to evolve, sometimes forward, occasionally backward, always complex. But those relationships no longer define my sense of self-worth or happiness. I am no longer the man desperately seeking approval. I am simply Floyd, a husband, a creator, a man living authentically. Sometimes, being told no is the greatest gift you can receive. It can close a door you were afraid to shut yourself and force you to find the one that was meant for you all along. Have you ever experienced a rejection that ultimately led you to something better? Drop a comment below and share your story. Sometimes our greatest disappointments become our most important redirections. If this resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that standing up for themselves is worth it, even when it's difficult. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember, the most authentic path is rarely the easiest, but it's always the most rewarding.